This is Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. In 2021, the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan. Under their rule, Afghanistan's economy has floundered, malnutrition has soared, and hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost. Most women have been banned from working. I speak to a collective today that works with writers who are marginalised by conflict in the country. Established in 2020, Untold Narratives was set up in response to the needs of a group of Afghan women writers who had little or no opportunity to work with editors or translators or to have their work published. With several of their stories published to the world in a book called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, their latest work is a collective diary of an Afghan writing group living in Kabul. The writers kept in contact via a WhatsApp group created by the collective, saving their messages and daily accounts of life under Taliban rule. Their book is now published, My Dear Kabul, a year in the life of an Afghan women writing group. During this episode, you'll also hear excerpts of the work read by translators and authors. Well, first I speak to the director of Untold Narratives, and that's Lucy Hannah. Lucy, welcome back to the programme. It's lovely to have you here.
Hello.
Tell me about Untold Narratives. How did it begin?
It began a very long time ago. Well, the idea began a very long time ago in about 2017 when I was working in Kabul with a group of scriptwriters on the long-running soap opera there called New Home, New Life. And we were talking about their fiction, prose fiction work, and the women in particular were very frustrated because they couldn't find publishers locally for their work, let alone internationally in translation. A lot to do with the fact that there's a dearth of literary translators and editors at that time in Afghanistan, and also that women in particular weren't really considered writers. It was very difficult to develop a career as a writer, as a woman. And so in response to that, myself and Najla and Parand, two of the writers in this book who were there then, we decided to try to raise funds to set up a project that would help writers connect with international literary editors and translators to develop their fiction and non-fiction for publication.
And so the first sort of fruit of that, if you like, was My Pen is the Wing of a Bird.
Yeah, well, we actually put out an open call across the country and got many submissions, almost 200, and we whittled that down with a group of Afghan readers to about 25 and worked with that group of 25 from 2020. And we were putting together this collection of short stories called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird in around sort of January to August 2021. And it was at that time when these stories were being polished and sort of fine-tuned that everything changed in Afghanistan. And so on the one hand, the writers were racing to meet the final deadlines for their submissions for My Pen is the Wing of a Bird and working closely with Untold's editors. And suddenly, on the other hand, they had to, well, their life upturned, their world upturned.
And this is, of course, when the Taliban took over.
Yeah. And that is the moment when they said we need to stay connected to each other. And that is when the group started exchanging messages then about their situation, you know, their world, what was happening to them. And they looked to each other for reassurance and hope, I suppose. And then that's when these groups started and these messages went on for the next 12 months between the 21 writers.
So this passage is by Nilofer. She basically is writing about what she's seeing on Facebook. And this is happening in the autumn, a few weeks after the fall. Facebook is filled with images of household goods. You can find them in Herat, Kabul and Mazar. From the pictures, you can see that these objects haven't been used before. It is so sad to think each time that a woman in Afghanistan must have bought these goods for her home with hope, and now she marks a price for selling that hope. And then Nilofer writes in another passage on the same day. A few days ago, I met one of my former students in town, selling grapes on a cart. I felt so terrible. His father was a soldier. If the government had not collapsed and his father hadn't lost his job, he might have been in his class learning. teacher's dream is always to see her students have a brighter future as a doctor, an engineer, or an artist. But I see with my own eyes and theirs that their future has been annihilated. When I said hello to Reza, he said he wanted to go to Iran with smugglers. He said by going to Iran, he could have a more promising future. I know for certain that in Iran, he will be a laborer and will not have a bright future.
So now these are women who, if they're in Afghanistan, they're probably forced to stay in their homes. Many of them, though, are in refugee camps in other parts of the world, and many of them have never met each other.
That's right. So, I mean, what people forget, I suppose, is, Afghanistan saw lockdown long before COVID. It was a very insecure situation when we were working with them initially. So many of them were working from home and never met. And we certainly didn't meet them because we couldn't go there. So out of about 21, I think probably even now, only 4 or 5 have actually met each other. And we have only met about 4 or 5 as well.
Lucy, how did you navigate the security situation? Because even just getting the initial text to you must have been an issue for them.
Well, very challenging, really, and continues to be challenging because we continue to work with this group. It's a combination, really, of, well, I won't go into too much detail, but changing the way we work often and trust, I suppose, between the group and us, in that we've spent a long time building up that trust between each other and working very closely with security consultants who work with us.
And I mean, they've had to rely sometimes on brothers or fathers to take pictures of their text. Sometimes you're getting photographically even.
That was at the beginning when we put out the open call. We certainly had many submissions sort of that came in via different mobile phones through family members because the woman writer certainly didn't have a laptop. And for the first 2 years of this programme, none of these writers had a laptop. We actually managed to find a kind donor who bought everybody a laptop during 21. But until then, most people were working off phones or internet cafes if they could get there.
Now, they've all had to change their names for this.
Yes.
This is a very big security concern.
Yes, we've had a lot of security concerns over the last few months. And not only we had to change names and obviously collaborating very closely with the writers because you're trying to get your voice heard. And now, as you know, with the new Taliban laws, women can't even speak in public. And so the last thing you want to hear is somebody saying you can't even use your real name. But we have had to change the names, yes, in agreement with the writers who have chosen a pen name. And we also had to change this book, My Dear Kabul, at the very last sort of few weeks. We had to excise some of the passages due to security. And we've had to make changes often along the way, constantly referring to safety issues. And it continues.
Tell me the backstory of some of the writers that have contributed to this book.
Gosh, OK. Mariam, for example, who is in Afghanistan still, she sent in a submission in 2019 to our first open call. Her sister, in fact, sent in her story. She'd been writing secretly for ages, but her sister knew about it and one of her brothers knew about it. And Mariam has since had 2 pieces in Words Without Borders, had 2 stories in My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, and I think 2 pieces elsewhere, and also writing for a publisher in Germany. So, she is literally really, working as a proper writer, despite being confined to home. Batul, who is now here seeking asylum in the UK, she is also working as a writer. I mean, this is a writers' group, a sort of conventional writers' group that works as any would anywhere in the world. The difference is that they are supported and connected to each other via a messaging app, and that's how they operate. And that setup is facilitated by Untold, working with very experienced literary editors and translators.
On translation, so these stories are mostly written originally in Pashto or Dari?
Both, one or the other. Yeah, the two main languages of Afghanistan.
And so finding translators.
Yes, that's a real challenge. There's a dearth, particularly in Pashto, of literary translators. Obviously, there are many interpreters because a lot of them have been working for the military who were in Afghanistan, for example. So it's not that people aren't speaking English in this case, but as you know, there's a lot of nuances and skill to working on a literary text with a writer and an editor that you need to learn.
I'd like for you to introduce us to a couple of people we're going to speak to in a moment. Niloufar, who is a writer, and her translator, Dr. Negin Kagar. Tell us a little about each of those.
So Dr. Negin Kagar is based here in the UK. She's actually a research scientist and translator and writer. And she's been working with Untold since we started in 2020. She, during the time when these messages were coming in, she would translate them as they came in, doing a sort of rough translation so we could see the type of messages that were coming in. And then later on, she has translated the My Dear Kabul messages from Pashto into English, along with Pawana Fayez, who did the Dari into English. And Niloufar, who is now living in Germany, one of the sort of long-standing members of the group, and she has had pieces as well in My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, and I think we'll let her tell you her story. I don't really want to speak on her behalf because we're not quite sure how much she wants to.
Well, and she's here, so let me bring in now Niloufar, along with her translator, Negin. Welcome to you both. Negin, I wonder if you would ask Niloufar for us what it's like, this whole process has been like, working with Untold Narratives.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It was during the Republic of Afghanistan when I was introduced to Untold, and it was very surprising that writer development program from abroad exists and support Afghan women. Since the collapse of the government and coming of the Taliban, I felt emotionally very, very upset and depressed. But it was only through the encouragement of Untold that I was able to write, because in that time when we haven't stick together in this group and we were not encouraged to keep writing, I think I wouldn't have been able to write again. And since our messages and diary notes are turned into a book, I'm really encouraged and I really want to keep on writing.
I wonder if Niloufar could tell us how it was living in Afghanistan during that year, how things changed. I'm reading part of her diary now. The Taliban are not allowing Hazaras to enter Kabul airport. They've blockaded the Pakistani border against Hazaras. Her voice is very strong throughout this, telling us all of the problems that they've encountered. And I wondered if she could just talk to us a little bit about how those freedoms gradually closed during that year.
I spent basically all the women and girls of Afghanistan spend and up to now this situation with hope. And if hope is taken from us, I'm sure that we won't be able to survive anymore. Niloufar says that I want to indicate to a situation. When I was at school, I was reading a poem from a French poet, Poulenbark, about freedom. That time, I did not understand the poem. What is it, freedom? But when everything was taken away from us with the collapse of the government, then I knew the true meaning of freedom.
There have been many more restrictions now just imposed on women in Afghanistan. I know that Niloufar is now in Germany. She's not living through this, but I wonder if she could give us some idea of what these new regulations mean to the women who are still there.
I'm here now in Europe, but my friends, my colleagues, the people I knew were all there. And as soon as and people live with a fear and harassment there. And as soon as there is a news about anything new to them, I feel more anxious and feared here, even I'm far away and live in a peaceful country. When the Taliban started this harassing and kidnapping the girls and arresting the women, I was not in Afghanistan, but I always insisted in our WhatsApp group to my friends and colleagues that please be careful with yourself. And because once they are arrested and put in the prison, their freedom is taken, one side, and when they are coming back, that's another like another honor related issues that is going on in the family. So I was really upset and anxious about them, and keep on insisting to them, please just be very careful and careful about about yourself, not to be arrested by the Taliban, and obey whatever they say, the hijab or something like that.
Nagina, I'm keen to get just a little bit of detail about what it feels like, these restrictions on women raising their voices in their own homes, the fact that they can't sing or read poetry aloud. I just either from you or from Nilofer, just a real sense of what it feels like living under those restrictions and how they try and get around them.
دیگه شما نمیتونین پرواز کنین. یه حس بده. البته
Nilüfer says that if you think of a bird put into a cage, how would that be? Because the bird is used to fly. And in Afghanistan, there are two different categories of women. Women who are born and raised in oppression and in the cage. They don't know what freedom is. But women who are educated and they know what freedom is. So imagine if a woman with a thought, with a thinking and freedom, who is used to the freedom of education and going out to work, is put into a cage. How would she feel?
So I am married. I'm very sad. A few days ago, I was contacted and told to bring all my documents to prepare for travel. Next week, I will probably fly and leave my country forever. I try to stay happy, but I cannot. Something is laying very heavy on my chest. I feel no emotion, as if I don't care to go. I will escape, but my family, parents, siblings, and friends will have to live and breathe here under the rule of this horrible braided man. I worry how my mother will bear the longing. All her children are leaving her, one by one, when she needs them the most. What kind of children are we, really? When I think about my father, my heart breaks. How can I tell him that I'm going away and I will not come back? I'm scared that when I meet my parents again, their eyes will no longer see and their backs will be bent. I look at my mother's face, and memories the wrinkle on her face. I say in my heart, I just hope that when I see you next time, you will look just like this. I start crying. Then I hate myself for not controlling my emotion. I walk toward my father. I'll probably leave next week. His eyes light up, and he laughs and thanks God for it. May you have a good trip, he says, and asks the detail about it. I feel that he is faking his happiness. I tell him that if he wants me to be here, I won't go anywhere. No, he says, you should go. You have no future here. Follow your own life and dreams. We will be here, and if fate brings us together, we will see each other again. If not, I send you in the hand of God. His word breaks my heart into pieces, and I feel the pain of being a father to a family. I feel again that we never existed, not in the past, present, or future.
Now joining the show is Sunila Galappatti, who's one of the editors of My Dear Kabul. She worked closely with the writers. Sunila, thank you very much for coming on to the show. You have put this book together brilliantly alongside Lucy and some others. I was so struck by the sense of urgency. It must have been very difficult to try and get some order into what was a huge cache of WhatsApp messages. How did you start?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting us to speak about this book. And as you said, I worked on editing it alongside Parwana Fayaz, who was one of the translators, and Lucy Hanna and Lily Razvi Toon. And I think one of the things that really helped us, actually, when I look back on the process, is how many of us were involved. We had 21 writers, 2 translators, 4 editors, other interpreters as well, advisors, people who read the manuscript. And we, in that multitude of voices, we had to be very clear that we were just going to be led by the writers, initially by their wishes for the book, and then by their words in the manuscript. It was a process of sort of peeling it back. The full diary runs to 200,000 words, and we had to bring this to a book of roughly 70,000 words. And we did it stage by stage. We talked to the writers about what they wanted for the book, and then we sat together as editors and talked about what it was about the book that we felt was important. And I then went to the full manuscript and tried to whittle it down, pull out passages, and we went through that process 15 times to gradually, sort of like an onion, peel back to something that we felt was the book.
I mean, so much of this is so raw and so personal. There must have been, as Lucy said, a huge amount of trust involved.
I think there really was. I mean, the writers trusted us to work on their manuscript in a language they didn't read fluently, or many of them did not read fluently. And so we had to really listen to the voices in the manuscript to try and piece it together. And in some ways, because it is immediate, because it's a diary, because it's written very personally, that wasn't as difficult as it sounds, because we could be led by the words on the page. And we could never compile the book again in the original languages. So what we had to do was to really describe to the writers in detail what it was looking like, what it was sounding like, what was contained in each section, so they could tell us if they wanted something out or they wanted something in, and whether the book felt like the diary they had written.
So what the book does is it takes us through this incredibly tumultuous time in Afghan history. And I wondered if you'd just describe for us that sort of narrative arc.
The narrative arc of the book is really the passage of a year, of an extraordinary year, of an extraordinarily difficult year. And we chose to stick to that chronology because we felt these were messages that were written in real time. They may not represent how a writer felt the next week or the next day. And so we'd follow their chronology and present the book in seasons. And one of the things that was important to us was not to force a kind of sense on the book. Because anyone who knows conflict knows that multiple truths exist simultaneously, that things don't always make sense, and we never wanted to subjugate the writer's words to the reader's understanding. So you follow what's happening in their lives. I suppose that is the narrative arc, what's happening in their lives and what's happening in Afghanistan. And there's another aspect that I would mention. We talk about the multitude of voices being these 21 women who are writing, but there are also other people in the book because they are living in Afghan society. They're talking to their cousins who live abroad about how their lives have changed. They're talking to women they meet in the park about what is happening in the present moment. And so it's peopled with, many more people than the writers themselves.
It's absolutely fascinating, and it just gave me such an insight in what it was like to live day to day in that time. The book has now come out, and Lucy, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation now. How is it being received?
Well, So far, hopefully well. I think it's very difficult because it's hard, as Sunila says, it's hard to explain. Like, it's not a... People say, well, what is it? And also, it's quite amusing. I went into a bookshop and said, where is it? And they said, well, we didn't know where to put it because there are no names on the front. And you think, oh, we never thought of that. We never crossed our minds. So if anyone sees it, please put it on the front table or somewhere.
And also, what genre is it?
Well, exactly. Yeah. So I have actually found it in world history, found it in women's rights or something, found it in all over the place. So I think it's confusing because the form is not predictable or not familiar. Yeah. And the answer is we don't really know yet. We, as you say, it's raw. This isn't literature in the sort of traditional sense. But what it is I think it's a really, you've never seen sort of frontline women reporting on what's going on around them quite in such an immediate and in such a group way. This is 21 voices. It's not one voice.
The group is very close, as you say, and you also say you're continuing to work with them. So what's the next project?
Well, this is an ongoing writer development programme, like any writer development programme, with editors like Sunila who are working with the writers ongoing. And this book is, something that came out of it during our time with this group due to circumstance. And so we continue to work with them to develop their work in their own languages and in translation in international literary journals around the world, and hopefully for future publications.
Lucy Hannah, Sunila Galappatti, and before that we heard from Nagin and Nilofer. Thank you very much indeed. My Dear Kabul, a year in the life of an Afghan women's writing group, is published by Cornet, and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the producer Steph Chungu, who also edited the show. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.